Good morning, ladies, and welcome to the Lunch and Learn for November here at the Harmon, ladies and gentlemen, uh, uh, to the Lunch and Learn here at the Harmon Museum. I'm John Zimkus. I am the Education Director and Historian in here. We've got a lot going on in the next couple of months, and I thought I'd tell you about a few of them. Um, on Saturday, December 6th and Saturday, December 20th, there'll be Yule Times in the town square. Our, our shop area in the Harmon Museum will be decorated for Christmas. Many of the shops will be open. There'll be characters. Um, there'll be activities. There's going to be a group rate, and there's also going to be an individual rate. It'd be a nice thing to bring to visit during the Christmas season, and I think you would enjoy that. It's open from 11 to 5. On Saturday, December 17th, Santa Claus will be at the Beetle Cabin between the hours of 2 and 4. So if you know somebody who would like to tell a few suggestions to Santa Claus and let him know what they would like for Christmas, please bring them and have them visit Santa here on Saturday, December 13th, between the hours of 2 and 4. On New Year's Eve, there is going to be Toast to Tomorrow here at the Harmon Museum. The Stormy Weather Jazz Group will be here between 7 and 10. So we will have hors d'oeuvres, we will have champagne, we will have wine, and we'll get you back home before midnight. Okay, so check our websites also for prices of that. On Friday, December 12th, we're going to begin a new exhibit at the Harmon in the Semendinger Gallery. It'll be Thomas Corwin Profiles in Courage. Thomas Corwin, far and away, the most important figure to come out of Warren County, definitely in the 19th century and perhaps at all times, actually. Sort of forgotten today, one of the most fantastic resumes, prosecuting attorney of the county, governor of the state, U.S. congressman, United States senator, secretary treasury of the United States, ambassador to Mexico under President Lincoln, and then one of Lincoln's pallbearers. Considered the greatest speaker in the first half of the 19th century, and also one of the funniest. There are stories of Abraham Lincoln couldn't wait to tell the latest Tom Corwin stories. A contemporary of Henry Clay and Daniel Webster. This audience might know what I'm talking about. Remember the TV series called Profiles in Courage, based on JFK's book? The very last episode was all about Tom Corwin, how he could have been president of the United States. They were seriously considering him, but he spoke out against the Mexican War as a land-grabbing war. Fascinating individual, and we're going to have his artifacts, art dealing with him, and it'll be up from December 12th through January 23rd. Starting in January, the first Saturday of January and February and March will be First Saturdays in Flight. Here at the Armstrong Gallery of Flight, we're going to have activities all dealing with various aspects of flight, limited to 12 people, open to all ages. So if your child or grandchild or you are interested in flight and want to learn more about flight and do some activities, that'll be open on the first Saturday of January, February, and March. On January 17th, we're going to have another Black Bag Bingo, and tickets are on sale for that right now. So you might want to take a look at our website and find out more information. As far as Lunch and Learns go, next month, December, on the 17th, I will have the pleasure of being your speaker, and I'm going to talk about Tom Corwin and the various aspects of his life. The Lunch and Learn will be on December 17th. December 18th will be the 160th anniversary of his death in Washington, D.C. And I will carry, as many of the things I just told you about his life and what have you, some fascinating stories. I think you will definitely enjoy them. On January 21st, Pam Adams will be our speaker, and her topic will be Ormsby McKnight Mitchell. I don't know how many of you know who that was, but definitely a Renaissance man of the 19th century. Born in Kentucky, grew up here in Lebanon, across the street from the Methodist Church. Went to West Point from Lebanon, graduated when he was still a teenager, like 19, stayed at West Point, became a professor of mathematics, was the chief engineer of the Little Miami Railway, was also the chief instigator and promoter of what is now the Cincinnati Observatory, became a Civil War general, and went by the name of Old Stars, not because of his rank having stars on his shoulder, but because of its connection with the Cincinnati Observatory. Fascinating story. I think you'll enjoy them. And then on February 18th, 6 days after his birthday, we will have the pleasure and honor of having Abraham Lincoln here to talk to you. Mr. Lincoln, through the hard work of John Cooper from Columbus, will be here, and he will tell you of his life, and then he will open it up to questions about his life, his family, and his accomplishments. It is one I think you will thoroughly enjoy. So there's a lot of neat things happening at the Harmon Museum. So mark your calendars, and hopefully we will see you all here later on. We'll begin eating in a little bit, and then we'll have our speaker. Welcome once again, ladies and gentlemen, to the Lunch and Learn for November here at the Harmon Museum. I'm John Zimkus, the Education Director and Historian. Our speaker today is Sue Watts. She grew up in Derby in the East Midland part of England. Derby is the unitary authority area for the ceremonial county of Derbyshire. It's about 129 miles from London, about 80 miles from Manchester, 52 or so from Birmingham. A little bit more interesting, perhaps, it's 16 miles from Nottingham. So I'm sure she learned about Robin Hood and the Sheriff of Nottingham as a child. She attended the University of Exeter in the West Country of England. That's the part of England that comes off on the bottom, and Exeter is about 67 miles from one of my all-time favorite TV shows where it's filmed, Doc Martin.
That's right.
So Port Isaac, which is the real Port Wynne, is on the coast about 67 miles to the west. Sue studied economics and economics with social history, which, looking at the first slide, there it is. One of her specialties was, in fact, the American Civil War, the antebellum period of the American history. And even today, she is active as a Civil War reenactor and as a Greater Cincinnati Ladies Living History Group. She worked in England first for Rolls-Royce and GE Aircraft, then came to the United States and eventually worked for GE Aircraft once again. During her working career, she has been a director, a strategic business planner, and a process improver. Other titles she could do probably a lecture on what all these titles mean. But she has been a senior business analyst, a technically support service manager, a principal consultant, a science and technology innovation portfolio director, a process improvement, and a project manager of process change. For our purposes, more importantly, she has been a volunteer at the Harmon Museum for 23 years. We were just talking, when she puts on her bib overalls, something big is happening. one of the biggest things she did was basically planned and rearranged the room you are in right now. She's the one who really took it into the Art Deco look. She also painted almost every single shop in the village green or township square, both inside and out. The signage, which often has artwork on it, is her creation. She's also organized the caterer's kitchen, where much of the food originally first landed before you enjoyed it today. She's also the grant administrator, working on a 2-year process, applying and successfully getting a $250,000 grant from the state.
450.
450. And improve the computers, fire suppression system, HVAC, and many other things. She is certified by the Xavier University as a project management. She has an office. You pass it every time you walk in here. It's, as you leave here, it's on the right, and it says Grant Administrator. I've never talked to Sue about this, but there's a little tiny piece of paper I taped to them, and it says, it's a picture of Alice in Wonderland, and it says, before entering, drink me. Her office is a closet. Literally, it's a closet. I don't think she holds any meetings in there because there's no room to be. I mean, the fact there's a desk we could get in there is quite amazing. She does have a window, which is quite fascinating. She does have a window, but you'll notice that little sign. Now, more importantly about all the things I have mentioned about Sue Watts, in her spare time, she is able to give a lecture for our Lunch and Learn series. Ladies and gentlemen, Sue Watts.
Yeah, I like to say that I am British by birth, but that I'm American by choice. And I've been here over 40 years in total, 25 of which in Lebanon. And I enjoy this town because there's a lot of similarities between this area and the area where I grew up. And part of what I'm going to show you now is how similar they really are. And I think one of the things that we started to look at in this presentation was how history can connect you with other parts of the world, other times in history. And I want to show you some of those things to help you to think how my life is put together, how my things happen to me. You'll see what I mean by that in a minute. So let's get started on that. Oh, there we go. Okay, so we've all got interconnectivity going off in our lives. And I'll just give you a quick example. My degree was indeed in economic and social history from Exeter. Do you know who else went to Exeter? J.K. Rowling's. A lot of the things that you will see if you're a Harry Potter fan actually comes from Exeter. There's a little shop under the cathedral with the little round glass windows, you know. That's where the sweet shop comes from in Harry Potter. So I went there. I also, if you know your Harry Potter, Dobie's sock. The textile industry was huge where I came from. And in fact, it was the start of the Industrial Revolution. I came from a little village outside of Derby called Duffield, which means the area of doves. But naturally, they were living there. And just down the road from that was one of the very first factories using water power to make cotton goods. Or first of all, they started out with woolen goods, but then cotton goods. And that was the first time they had this idea of bringing workers together, having people live close to factories, and then they would also have a place where they would buy all their food and everything. And it was kind of like Bourneville was over here, but it was over there in the 1690s. Okay, so this was very, very early on. And so another piece that people might like to know is that the water that powered all those factories came through limestone, because that area is full of limestone, and it's a great place to make beer. So the leading beer companies in England make their beer, like Bass, Worthington, people like that make their beer there because the water's very good. But also, not only did they have factories that made cotton goods and so forth, they also had pottery, because the clay that came down from the ice age, just like here, where we have, you know, the ice came down to a certain point, and what's left behind is very rich. Same there. It actually made extremely good clay, pottery, and fine bone china. One of those people who developed that was Wedgwood. We've got some pieces of Wedgwood at the museum, and his son-in-law was Darwin. I always think this is kind of neat, that they were all friends. I was born in Florence Nightingale's house, which was a maternity home at the time. She wasn't home then, but you know. Anyway, they were all friends. The Nightingales, the Wedgwoods, and these people, and they all kind of fed off one another economically as well as socially. You know, so they were all in cahoots. Now, let's see if I can get this right this time. Nope, that goes that way, that goes that way. Okay. So why do I call Derbyshire? And I apologise for this. We seem to be having a problem with the fonts when it changes from one view to another. Why is Derbyshire considered the cradle of the Industrial Revolution? Well, it's got some things in it that are very similar to what we have here in Warren County. We have rivers. The Derwent and the Trent, particularly the Trent, was used for power generation, also for transportation, and of course for beer. Have you noticed how we've got all these little breweries coming up around here? I don't know if that has got something to do with it. We also had a lot of canals, and we don't have so many canals around here until you get up into mid-Ohio, and of course we do have some interesting canals up there. The 19th century was a huge boost for that area. It's very rich people made their money on building railroads in England. And the people and the goods moved around the whole of England, and then, of course, the whole world. But these wealthy families that I was just mentioning, they had time to be well educated, and they even encouraged their workers to be able to read and to think for themselves. And so the wealthy families had time to experiment. And with the Protestant religion, that being the way it was in England at the time, they were traveling around. The Methodists particularly were traveling around. And we'll go into that a little bit more later. So when I'm applying for grants, I always put this up because I think this really says it for Warren County, is Warren County is emblematic of the history of America. Because in this county, we have the successes, the failures, perseverance. We have politics. We have pioneers, artists, innovators who laid the building blocks for this country. And so I think even if we're just talking about Warren County, we're actually talking about the real America. Not the America that's on TV, but the real America. So in Warren County, we also had these same aspects I've just gone through with you on Derbyshire. We've got the geographical advantages of rivers and so forth, technology innovation, hydroelectric power, wealth. People were coming in here with new ideas and experiments. Education. Did you know we had a university here? Maybe many of you do know that, but we also had colleges for folks, both the African American population as well as the white population, and we also had religious aspects such as Quakerism. Quakerism was very big here. So if you look here, we have the Little Miami Valley River and the Great Miami Valley. What is it? Little Miami River and the Great Miami River. Right. Which is similar to the Derwent and the Trent rivers. The we had innovation where they could use, I can't remember how many mills now we had on the Little Miami River, but we had a lot, didn't we? Yeah, at one point, yeah. And that's, when you see it now and it's all so sleepy, I think it's kind of amazing that it was so busy at one point in time. But that was also useful for development. I'm just trying to make sure I don't miss telling you something that I've got written down here. So we also have an educated population, and that's really essential for economic growth. And so we had education we had orphanages that taught children as well. The Shakers also took in children. One of the things about the Shakers, which I always think is fascinating, is they took in people who were destitute and allowed them to become Shakers, brought up their children. If they wanted to leave, they could leave, but they were like a catch net for the population here. Because, if your farm failed, where are you going to go? There was no social security, there was no, government support like we have now. And so the religious aspects of this area are extremely important. Now, when you look in the museum, there's all these factors are in there. For example, we've got examples of the Natural Normal School. That's one of our exhibits. We also show a schoolroom. We have a little schoolroom that's like the one-room schoolhouse, and some of the memorabilia from some of the schools in the area. We also have the Little Miami River exhibit, which shows you the flora and the fauna from the Little Miami, but also shows where some of the mills were on there. That's as you go down towards the folk art area. And we've also got a lot of aspects of the religious benefits to this area, such as, for example, Quakers. We have the artwork of quite a few Quakers, like Eli Harvey, for example. He was a Quaker, but he moved out to California for a lot of his life, but he was brought up here. And he came back in the 50s and gave us a lot of his sculptures. But he designed things like the MGM lion and the Order of the Elks. Yeah. And the Greyhound bus service, those emblems of animals he made in brass, and it was bronze rather, and was we've got some of those pieces, not the lion, but we got some of those pieces. We also have been supported by and have exhibits on some of the big families in this area, such as the King family, for example. Our Shaker collection is supported by the Jones family and their offspring. So we've had a lot of connections with some of these industrialists. Of course, Harmon himself was, do you know what he invented? The subdivision. It's the subdivision, which is kind of interesting. But he gave back. He gave back a lot of his money to the parks around the country, and he helped to build the building next door, the main old museum part, as a community centre. So again, this is the whole museum is really emblematic of the families, the rich families that influence this area. So some of the links to the past that we can see in the museum. We know that the founding of America and everything was based on a lot of Roman principles. I mean, Cincinnati itself has got the 7 hills to mirror the 7 hills of Rome. Cincinnatus was, the Society of the Cincinnatus was a big revolutionary war group, and Cincinnatus himself was a Roman nobleman who was a farmer who turned his plows into shears and fought for the Romans and then went back to being a farmer again. The fact that most politicians in Roman times didn't live very long, I think he made a wise move. He went back home again. But Cincinnatus is really tied up to that. And in fact, I met a gentleman in France, in Brittany. His great-great-great-great-grandfather was a member of the Cincinnatus, and fought with Lafayette. And when he heard we were from Cincinnati, he was so excited about that. So, when you look at what we've learned and used to form our current society, we have the heritage of the Romans. They also turned to both the Romans and the Greeks for our government, our structure of government, and how we define some of the freedoms that we have. So our checks and balances, our rules of law, they all come from ancient times. But have you ever thought what it took to build those ancient civilizations? So just take some very simple things. You think of the economy of Rome stretched from the Middle East all the way over to Hadrian's Wall. Stop there. Says a lot for the Scots. Stop there. And they had some very interesting things that they repeated throughout the entire empire. It's not unusual to see a Roman statue, for example, at Bath in England, or you can see it over in Constantinople, or whatever it's called today. All those places, there was a consistency of design. There was a consistency of skill. Your average slave or servant didn't know how to make a statue. It had to be made out of special materials that had to be mined. It also had to have designs. They had to be trained. There's a whole supply chain to create a statue. Similarly with fountains. They had a lot of fountains in, if you've ever been to Rome, there's a lot of fountains. That came in, you're just using physics rather. They had no engines to bring the water in, but they did. So what does that have to do with Warren County? Well, actually, it has quite a bit, because when people came here, there wasn't anything. Everything had to be thought through and the supply chain for it created. And I don't know if you know this or not, but in the 19th century, people in cities in Europe didn't have a lot of variation in food. They would have grain that could be stored in the cities, but they didn't eat much meat because it would go bad very quickly. And as the cities grew larger and larger, it was more and more difficult to get vegetables into them. They had a very bland diet. But here, when we came here, and we could, hunt and kill things, and we could grow in these vast prairie areas, the average American in the 19th century increased by 6 inches. So the size of the average American male increased by 6 inches. In England, it went down by 6 inches. It's incredible, but that's what happened because of the effect of living in a city versus living close to the source of food. So again, the supply chain was incredible how fast that grew. You'll see in the museum there is a picture of a guy called Ichabod Corwin. And when he first came here, there was nothing. And yet the painting that we have of him shows him as being extremely affluent, jewels on his brooch, and he's got his hair all done nicely, and he's got velvet jacket, and he's reading the newspaper. It's like all the trappings of being comfortably middle class in 40 years. Absolutely amazing how fast that happened, because when people first turned up here, there was nothing. Now, there was a lot of wood, and that wood was used to build just about everything. In fact, many of you may know that some of our sewage systems was used with wood. There's a corded road that goes all the way to Mason. That was corded roads when they just knock the planks down, and it's literally like corduroy, because you can drive over that. And in the Carolinas, they did that a lot as well, because there are a lot of straight pine trees. But when people first came here, there was so much wood, they used it for as much as they could. So one of the things that, as a project manager, I like to connect with is Stonehenge and what that means for us here in Lebanon. Stonehenge was planned just as Lebanon was planned. This is as early as I could find, John. I don't know if it is the earliest map, but it's a layout of the area of Lebanon. Lebanon was a planned development. Other places in the Warren County also were planned developments. And of course, we have Harmon, who's developing subdivisions. But Stonehenge was planned. It started out using the materials they had to hand, which was wood. The original henge was a wooden henge. And then when they realized they really needed it, then they built the permanent structure. But in order to do that, they had to quarry this stone. It's about 60 miles away, and they carried it on rivers and brought it to Stonehenge, which is like in the middle of nowhere. And even thousands of years later, it's still in the middle of nowhere. But up here, these lintels that go across, did you know that there's actually a scoop in them? And the ones that are the upright pillars, there is a little ball, and they fit like that, so they won't fall off. And the big lintel has two scoops, and then the pillars have the little balls. Somebody had to plan that. You can imagine dragging it 60 miles and it doesn't fit, so you had to have some project management going off there. Well, the same with this. When Lebanon was planned out, they knew that they wanted the roads to be, nice and wide, not like some of the little ones that had been developed over the years in Europe. They wanted nice big roads so they could bring carts in and industrialize. So it took planning, and it took planning from nothing. So, when you look at Warren County now, we went from, was it the Sims purchase, this area? The Sims purchase, in the beginning, it took nearly 4 days to get to Cincinnati. But within 30 years, we had newspapers, we'd had roads. They'd taken those original wooden houses, those log cabins, and built the city houses that we see now in this area, in Springboro and other areas like that. They were the second step, as it were, as the infrastructure was being built. Okay. So again, when you look at the past, particularly the Roman past, that is the basis, I think, for our legal system and for politics. The museum has a lot of things to show you about that time period. In fact, I'll show you pictures because they're much more interesting. We have connections with the World Heritage Site, and we have a wonderful collection of First Nation peoples' artifacts. And we also have as you can see here, a mammoth tusk. It's in 3 pieces, but hey, after 1 million years, what do you expect? We also have a Roman baby head, which I'm not sure where that came from. I don't know its provenance, I'm not sure. But of course, our architecture as well of the museum itself, it also lends to the Roman style architecture, and this, of course, is Fort Ancient, which is now a World Heritage Site, along with other moon worshipping sites, taking you all the way to Chillicothe. So the museum can really show you some of the aspects of the past that we leveraged in order to build up this area very, very quickly. It's always good to be second, right? So you learn from other people's mistakes. One of the other things too, one of the other things too is Europeans didn't just stay in their little villages and then suddenly decide to come to America. They moved around a lot. They moved around for food, they moved around for work. And particularly in the Industrial Revolution, maybe the 18th century, they were moving around a lot because of pressures of the economy. There were definitely wars that were happening, but also where there was work, people had to move to where there was work. And a lot of people on farms were being removed because they wanted to put sheep on, or they wanted to build on that area, what have you. People were forced into towns, And then, you know, once you start that generational move, then there'll soon be another one. And people would come to America, and it's a kind of a two-step process to get here. People would come to the East Coast, and then a generation or so later, then they'd move over. So that, you know, it was very seldom that people came straight from England or France or Germany or wherever to their permanent place here in the US. Very often it was a kind of a double migration. But they brought with them a lot of the things that help to make our economy now. And they brought different things with them. For example, food. I did a research project on food, and that's where I learned the fact about the height of people. But just think, if you're used to eating a certain way and you come into the middle of nowhere, how are you going to eat what you're familiar with eating? And a lot of people don't do well if they eat things that they're not used to eating. There is a genetic component to the way you want to eat. And so they had to find ways of bringing in the different foodstuffs, trying to see if they would grow here or not. Again, building up the whole economy here. So the folks in Warren County also had a lot of movement within, once people had come here. A lot of people came here from like Pennsylvania and places like that, where they came down here to settle. They still moved around a lot, and they were still influenced a lot by communication, which was getting more sophisticated, by people moving around. So, for example, people started to do world tours. I don't know if you know, but the King family and so forth, they did grand tours. We've got a lot of information about Europe from those families that did their grand tours, which meant they went to the key locations in Europe, took a few months or a couple of years to do that, but brought back a lot of ideas and concepts and a lot of knickknacks, which we've got at the museum. Also, the World Fairs were a really good place for people to learn all the new ideas. The Civil Wars, you know, it's hard to keep them down on the farm, you know. The Civil Wars and the World Wars made a huge difference to the folks here. Did you know that they've traced the flu pandemic of 1920 to some pig farmers up in northern Ohio? Yeah, I was reading that the other day. So also, you know, this area was tied politically, as we were talking earlier about Thomas Corwin. This area didn't really get too many trains, and it's a real shame. I wish we had more trains. We did have a train, but we didn't have the heavy canal and train mechanism of travel that they have in like Holland and England and so forth. But they did have roads, and so now people can get in and out of this area much more quickly. But that was kind of later. And also, of course, the Shakers, the other Protestant religions, just as they did in Europe, they were coming here and traveling around and passing information, giving ideas, stimulating people's thought processes, not just religiously, but also economically. So one of the things that can show how we're influenced by the economy and also have influenced the economy, we have an incredible textile collection. And I want to tell you a little bit about that. Again, supply chain is key with this. We have an enormous collection of clothing going back to the early 19th century, and some textiles going even further back than that. We have an amazing collection. And it kind of tells the story of how people developed the more sophisticated side of economics. You know, once you've got the food, once you've got the house, then what are you going to do? So, do you know who this is? Ever seen this guy before? This is Otzi, and he was found in an ice pack in the Alps. And when they first found him, they thought he was one of those folks who died trying to climb up one of those mountains. And then they realized he was actually something akin to 5,000 years old. And but the important thing is, you see he has a hat. That was made by somebody. Somebody had the concept of a hat, even thousands of years ago. He also has a knotted cape that he wore. And they reckon that what he was wearing with his furs and his cape and everything was enough to protect him from the cold weather up in those mountains. And so somebody had the idea of making clothing and spreading the word how those things were made. You know, originally maybe people just wore skins, but they start to smell after a while. So then you find out how you're going to preserve them. Then you think about tying things in knots, and that's where you get the knotted capes. This is actually made of grass. So you get this idea that even though this is one man frozen in the earth for thousands of years, he was actually a part of a communication and a supply chain, just like we have today, where the clothes come from, or how people learn things, the society that he was in. So I imagine, I don't know if you've ever done this, but you think of times when people start to build a big building, right? A cathedral, one of these big cathedrals. And somebody at some point in time went, where would you like me to start digging? And the first spade was turned, right? So I like to imagine that everybody since time began gets up every morning and goes, oh, I've got to get up again, and have something to eat. They go out, they do their job, right? Those are the things that to me are more important than the politics. It's how people actually lived. So you could imagine this chap had to go. We don't know why he was out there in the snow, but he was out there in the snow. So the conversation with his wife before he left. Do I really have to wear this hat? It's not that cold. No, dear, don't worry, nobody will see you. So the moral is always wear clean underwear whenever you go out. You never know what's going to happen to you, right? And so I think he was our first GQ guy, but you can imagine how this developed over thousands of years, so that the Romans had fine silks, going all the way to here, where people again say, well, now where am I getting my new dress from, or my new coat from, or when people arrived here, how did they do that? Well, very quickly after they came, there was the idea of bringing in materials for clothing, for making pottery and things like that. Well, mostly that sort of stuff was brought in, they've already made. That was the supply chain to start with. So when you have a look at our textile collection, you'll see that a lot of it was influenced by magazines and newspapers who spread the word about how people should dress. This is a copy from Peterson's magazine. And this lady over here is Empress Eugenie of France, who led a lot of fashion. And we have examples of dresses that were copies of her. So people were trying to copy what they knew when they came over here. Of course, you had to be fairly affluent to dress like that. But also Queen Victoria became somebody that they liked to copy. The whole idea of having huge families and mourning was another thing that she actually made popular after Albert died, and that became a huge industry, so bad that in the First World War they actually had to ban black in some countries because people were spending all their money on getting their clothes black and not on things to keep them fed and so forth. So the other thing, and I don't think I've got out of this order of this. Yeah, the other thing is that we were all being told how to behave. You know, you're going to have a tea party and you're going to leave a calling card. And, there are certain polite things that you do when you drink a cup of tea and all this kind of business. A lot of that was written by a woman called Mrs. Beatons, if you know about the English history of this, but there's American equivalents too. But Mrs. Beatons looks like this little white-haired old lady who knows everything. She died at 30. So, you know, it was all a put-up job in order to sell product to you. Just remember that. Someone else that we have examples of in the museum is Charles Worth. Charles Worth was the first fashion house in Paris. He used his wife as his first model, and she'd walk down the street and everybody go, "Oh, I like that." She goes, "Well, my husband can make you one." And then they had this idea of having a of having a show. Charles Worth was an Englishman, which is pretty amazing to me that he was like this fashion designer, the first fashion designer, but he was incredibly successful. And we actually have this dress here is one of his dresses, but made in 1870, and we have it as part of our collection. And I had the privilege to preserve that. I was able to encase it in a kind of mesh that preserves these dresses. This satin is like the day it was worn. It looks wonderful. Inside, all of the lining is disintegrating. And one of the reasons for that was that this is a very expensive silk, but you want to line it. So when you line it with something cheaper. But people didn't want cheap stuff. They wanted it to look expensive. So the silk was sized. It was starched. And over time, that starch dried out and became brittle and would cut the material. And so the whole thing would fall apart. I've actually been down to Sharon Woods, which is one of the areas where I used to reenact. And they had this beautiful 1910 dress. It was all ribbons. And we picked it up, and the whole thing fell back into the box in pieces because of this sizing. Now, Jeannie let me experiment on something we were throwing away a couple of years ago. I took a petticoat home that was starting to do this, and I put it in water, melted the size, and that material was good. So I'm on a mission to tell people that that's how you preserve things like that, because that size is what caused the problem. It wasn't the age of the fabric, it was the size. But we have some incredible dresses and paintings of dresses in our collection. The King collection is very robust. They had a lot of wonderful late 19th century clothes. And as I say, we have, this is a Paris gown. This was a wedding dress, the 1870s. So some of the other styles that we have, for example, we don't have anything as early as this. We don't have any, what I call Regency, what you would call maybe Napoleonic War era. We don't have anything that early. But we do have this. This is made out of pineapple fiber, right? And I think it's incredible that it's so fine and delicate. It's almost like chiffon. It's made out of pineapple fiber. And this was worn to an inaugural ball back in the 1850s. This is also not ours, but it's very indicative of some of the later pieces that we have. We have a lot of beaded jackets for some reason or other that are of this time period, the late 1890s, 1910s. And I want to talk a little bit more about this picture down here. This is the silhouettes of fashion from the French Revolution onwards. And what you can see, I hope, there is that people began to question the politics and everything. You see how these dresses get smaller and are smaller. But then as people get more and more affluent, they want to show off how rich they are, and they used big skirts. They got bigger and bigger and more flouncy and so forth. And then came the Civil War. And during the Civil War, people, well, women particularly, had to do a lot at home, and they also did a lot of nursing. They were starting to move out into the workforce, so the dresses went behind them. And then over the next 30, 40 years, the dresses, the bustles, got smaller and smaller until they dropped off around about 1890. And you started to get dresses that were much more practical for women who were actually working. So by the end of the First World War, when again you had women having to do jobs of men, the dresses became much more utilitarian and much more practical for a working woman. So by the time you get here, you've got dresses that you would recognize today that people wore because they were working. And that made a huge difference in the style of what we wore, was because of what women were doing. And it really does tell the tale of how women's dress reflected the way the economy was changing at the time. One of the other things in our collection are crafts. Now, we've got some interesting handicrafts here. This is one of our samplers. You know, little girls would do that. We also have, as you can see here, an incredible collection. And from one of our exhibits, I took that from our website. But everybody did crafts back then. So you have, for example, Queen Victoria. Did you know Queen Victoria was a knitter? She loved knitting. With all those grandchildren, I'm not surprised. But she loved knitting. And so this is an example of the sort of things that a little girl would wear. She's got a little knitted cape and a hat and so forth. Even French shepherds would knit. Now, if you can see this, he's sitting upon stilts, knitting away, watching his sheep. Not sure what happened when that little dog underneath ran off and hit one of those sticks and he went flying. I'm not sure what happened then. But that even men, sailors as well, of course, knitted a lot in those days. There was the mechanical knitting, but this is craft orientated. These things that were pretty revolting, those are actually Egyptian. They are Egyptian socks. They found in a tomb that, of course, they had sandals, you see, so they had to have a little gap there for those. And the kind of knitting that you've got up here is several hundred years old. It's not thousands of years old, but that's actually a machine knitted one. But definitely back in the 15th century, people were knitting then and making jackets and things like that. So we have a tremendous collection of crafts that were made in this area or brought to this area. And there's an expression I like, which is anonymous was a woman. We don't know who made a lot of these things, but very often it was women who were making crafts at home. Now, I was talking about advertising and how Mrs. Beaton's was really a way to sell people things. We have a great collection of china, and also in our shops, we've got a general store full of old packages of things. And it's interesting to look at those because a lot of the things that were collected by people or used by people were just the result of advertising without really knowing it. For example, who said we need to have breakfast every morning? Dr. Kellogg, which is why we have Kellogg's. Also, the idea of dogs, the idea of having lap dogs and buying things for them and having dog beds and all this kind of stuff, that was Crufts. That was the gentleman who actually, in England, Crufts is the big dog show, but he was actually produced items for animals, dogs, and that was why he put that. The other thing that we have a lot of in the museum are examples of time-saving devices. Particularly if you go up in the Shaker Gallery, you'll see that they have a apple peeler shredder corer, and many of you will have one if you ever went to a Pampered Chef party, right? Well, actually, the Shakers invented that. If you go up there, you can see that. So, I say I've already talked about the books written on etiquette, but there was also the growth of designing your home. Your home had to look a certain way. Again, it was all advertising. And it's when you look at that, you realize how much the economy was driven forward by that advertising. When you look upstairs, you will see we've got a lot of these things on, that's Royal Worcester, I think. This is Prince Albert, and that's Royal Crown Derby. Where I came from, Derby, Royal Crown Derby. That means that two monarchs picked that set for their special set, because you got the royal if they picked it, and then you got the crown if the crown did. They got it twice. It's the only china that's got it twice. Okay, some of the other things we have in the museum that can help you to visualize the past and how much things haven't really changed that much. We had the Beadle cabin. If you've ever been in that, it's just across the way. Well, no, it's just across the way there. The Beadle cabin was encased in a farmhouse that was going to be torn down. And this happened a lot. Now, in Europe and in other parts of the States, very often the first house built there was abandoned and a new one was built close by. But it seems like in this area we have quite a lot of log huts. When you have a look at that, can you see how important it was for them to have a sideboard? This is their cupboard. And they've got beds and they've got little holes to store lights in and things like that. We have that in our houses today, that we want to have places to store things and we want to have, side lights and things like that. That's how old that building. But we in this area aren't quite so old, but we do have this example of one of the first houses built in this area, built in 1795. So if you get a chance to go and see it over there, go and see that, because I give you an example of they had to create that from nothing. And that's where they lived. And that's actually also the cabin where one of the very first Shaker services was held west of the Alleghenies. We believe it was the first. So it's a quite incredible cabin. Now, I know that a lot of places in Europe are an awful lot older than we have here. There is actually a place, I found this place, it's called Matera in Italy. They think it is the longest inhabited town ever, and that some people can go back thousands of years and say they're living in the same house as their ancestors. Isn't that incredible that you're living in the same place for thousands of years? One of the things that struck me about Rome, when I've been looking into the influence of Rome on us, is that many of the apartments in Rome were also lived in for hundreds of years. Until Rome fell, 600, some of these apartments had been used for hundreds of years. Can you imagine the paperwork on that? That people had contracts to rent, they had to keep it maintained, they inherited the apartment block and then took over collecting rents and things like that. We don't have anything that old, but we do have original deeds and maps of this area as far back as it existed as a settlement. Definitely out of living memory. So again, not quite so old, but I think it's still fascinating. Another area that's really fascinating, and again, we've got things in the museum, is food. You hear people all the time saying, oh, you don't want to eat fast food, that's bad for you. No, you don't eat fast food. Do you know we've always eaten fast food? We've always eaten what they call street food. That's what fast food really is, in a car. But street food was in ancient Rome, was in ancient Greece. Why? Because their houses were made of wood. They couldn't have fires in them, so they had to have it cooked for them. In medieval Europe, they would have their bread baked at a baker's oven. So the idea of us going home to eat is actually very new. Probably due to advertising. Communal eating. We've always ate communally, whether it was around a fire in ancient times or we're talking about medieval manners, or people always ate together. It's a very social thing to do. So eating out, going to restaurants and things like that, is actually older again than eating at home. We already talked about the pioneer diet, and one of the reasons why we did so well in actually where Lebanon is because stagecoaches need to stop there to eat. Again, there is a oracle in ancient Rome. I think it's Orpheus. It's at Delphi. There you go. Delphi had people come to it for thousands of years. How do you think they did that? Traveling on the road, needing food, needing security, needing money to move from place to place to pay for your hotel or boarding place. Very, very sophisticated, and we needed to build the same thing here in the US, and the Golden Lamb was part of that, building that. A lot of times, some of the food as the economy expanded was not good for you. If you've ever seen that Edam cheese with the red on it, originally that was lead. Not very good for you. Also, a lot of drink containers had lead in the composition of metal drinking fountain things, and that also caused a lot of illnesses. And they think that there's been various expeditions that have used tinned food, and they actually went crazy because they were eating too much lead because the tins weren't made properly. So what do we got in the museum that shows that? Of course, the cabins, fireplace and so forth is a working fireplace. We also have a shaker kitchen that shows you how they prepared their food, and you can see that room. And we are actually going to be building a tavern using some of the memorabilia from the Golden Lamb, which they've kindly donated to us. And we're going to be making that both a functional and an exhibit area. And we're going to try and make it look like, what did it look like in the 1830s when the stagecoaches were still coming through, when we would actually have a tavern for people travelling through. Another exhibit that's well worth seeing is the clock shop. Because, believe it or not, they couldn't make watches over here until after the Civil War. The actual mechanism had to be made in Europe and brought in here. They could make the clock case, lots of wood, got lots of that, and they did. They made these lovely, that's a narrow-throated grandfather clock. But as time went on, they would move from one clock on the church or something to a clock in the house, 2 o'clock on your wrist. Closer and closer as people had to time their day more and more exactly. And we have some wonderful examples of fob watches and mantle watches, as well as the grandfather clocks. But that was something where the supply chain was very complicated to begin with, and it made it very expensive to own a timepiece until they could start to make the mechanisms in the US. The other thing that the museum shows, just so we don't forget anything, is transportation. When you go throughout the museum, you'll see that, of course, we've got a lot of the road transportation, such as, for example, this wagon here. Smithsonian has one like it, but it's all in pieces and it doesn't move. That thing moves. We can move it wherever we want. I mean, I wouldn't take it out on the road, but it's still all in one piece. We have a sled, we have a postal delivery van. We even have fire trucks, very early fire trucks for pumping water. Did you know that if you didn't carry the same insurance as the fire company, they wouldn't put out your fire? Yeah, they'd stand and watch it. That's changed now, thank goodness. Some things are better. But that was, we've got examples of that. We also have the Armstrong Gallery over here, which is a really good example of early flight. We've also got some of the aviators in this side here, and across the back, some of the memorabilia from Neil Armstrong, who was a resident here for about 20 years, and some more of his more personal items, which we kind of like, some of the pieces that he kept at his farm here. So, In conclusion, you know, I find that we're linked to the past. There's always going to be connections between things. And I find it fun to look for those. I hope that what I've said today has made you think, oh, I better go and look at that in the museum, because the museum continues to tell a story more and more richly as we learn more and more about the things that we have in this museum. And hopefully it makes you feel even more rooted in this area. I know I enjoy putting down roots here, and I hope you guys continue to do so too.
Thank you, Sue. Does anybody have any questions for Sue? Okay. Yes.
I just had a comment, going back to the man that was found in the Alps,
See ya.
The PBS program Nova has done a couple hours on him, and scientists that examined his body think he was being pursued across the Alps by, I mean, who knows what, from the wounds on his body, and he had broken bones, and I think he basically was a murder case.
They did think that at one time. The jury is really still out on that, because they didn't actually have, back in those days, bows and arrows. They had spears. And so once they cleared up that fact, they're not really sure whether he was trampled by what he was hunting, or they don't know. And they're not even sure now, I read the other day, that those wounds were actually inflicted by sharp objects that way. Yeah, it's he doesn't look like that. He's all mangled up, you know. So it's a bit difficult to see. But yeah, they're still speculating why he was there and who would have. But at one time, I don't know if you know this, but at one time they were always telling people that somebody had been sacrificed in a bog. Right? It was they were in Sweden and places like that. That's no longer considered to be true, because people view history based on the way they live now. So a lot of Victorian history interpreted the past as being very violent, war-orientated, and now they think that, for example, people migrated peacefully and they didn't fight as much as the Victorians thought they did. So now, as we're moving forward, we're coming up with other concepts and other ideas, and it's all guesswork. You know, it's all guesswork. You could be 100% right, or it could have been something totally different. And that's the fun, I think, of trying to speculate what it might be.
To that vein, that's how Fort Ancient got its name. It had a walled area, so where do you have walls? In a fort. It's pretty old. It's Fort Ancient. And they don't think it ever was a military fort. They thought it was the way you might put a wall around a community area or something. It's 2.5+ miles, plus it has too many openings to be a fort. Well, thank you so very much, Sue, and thank you for all joining us. Please remember there are discounts at our gift shop, and hopefully we'll see you all next time. Take care.